This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone, and this is indeed The Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio. We are the crown jewel of AM radio, and we've got a jam-packed show for you today. I want to start on a personal note. Last Sunday, I announced the sad news that my sister's only son, my nephew, passed away last week, now 2 weeks ago, of a fentanyl overdose. And the incredible number of letters and cards and text messages and emails and prayers from so many in the 77 WABC audience has really been touching and comforting for my sister and my family and for myself. I think of you who listen in here every Sunday for 2 hours from 4 to 6 as our growing family, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your prayers and your condolences. Politics, as Mel Brooks said in the great movie History of the World Part 1. If you've never seen that movie, I highly recommend it. But let me make a promise to you, because we get a lot of messages on this as well. Before the end of today's program, I am going to lay out my mother's meatball recipe. This was my grandmother's meatball recipe. We've had a lot of requests for it. So if you want to grab a pad and paper so you can write this down later in the show, before we leave you today, I'm going to tell you how to make the greatest meatballs you have ever had. The presidential contest is off in earnest. Donald Trump scoring a victory in Iowa that was really one for the history books. The previous high water mark was my old boss, Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, who won the caucuses there in 1988 by a margin of 12.5 points. That was the greatest single margin prior to the recent Iowa caucuses. Donald Trump won by a stunning 30 points, 3 times as much as Dole, setting a new record. As I think most of you now know, Governor Ron DeSantis struggled for a very distant and narrow second place finish. And then Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, came in third. Now, after that, after the smoke had cleared, Nikki Haley said, well, this is now down to a 2-person race. Considering that she had come in third, she took a little guff for that, but she actually turned out to be correct just days later, when Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, having spent $300 million running for president, announced that he was suspending his campaign and issued a rather grudging endorsement of President Donald Trump. Now, since that time, he has continued to snipe at Trump in his social media postings. Politics doesn't hate anything more than they do a sore loser. That's why when Richard Nixon very narrowly lost the presidency in 1960, and figures as important as President Dwight Eisenhower and New York Governor Tom Dewey urged Nixon to contest that election against Jack Kennedy, Nixon knew that he would only come across as a sore loser. And if he were to challenge the election result, well, he would probably never be president. Then, of course, Trump follows up his victory in Iowa with an incredible and more interesting victory in New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is interestingly unique because the Secretary of State there, actually in violation of state law, allowed independents to vote in the Republican primary. While there is a section of state law that allows this, it requires certification by the New Hampshire Republican State Committee to allow it. No such certification was ever issued, so an argument could actually have been made that the primary itself, well, it was illegal. But I think this was the beta test for the Biden campaign in a way. You see, almost 50% of those who voted in the Republican primary in the Granite State were not Republicans. That's right, they were independents. A PAC called Working for Nikki Haley actually re-registered 8,000 Democrats by the October 6th deadline, changing their registrations to independent so they could vote in the Republican primary. And then New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who supported Nikki Haley, worked with an enormous budget to try to get independents to invade the Republican primary. If you look at the votes of just Republicans, Donald Trump actually got 70% of the vote in New Hampshire. But after you look at the primary total having been flooded with almost 50% non-Republicans, well, Trump still pulled out a 11-point victory. Very solid when you consider what he was up against. Trump, by the way, spent about $18 million total. I'm still examining Nikki Haley's total spending. You have to put together her campaign spending as well as her PAC spending. But right now, I have her at about $34 million. Plus, of course, she got a healthy assist from the legacy media that would like her to emerge as the chief challenger to Donald Trump. Even the New York Times, which I often disagree with, reported in a great piece by Shane Goldmacher that Donald Trump's victory in New Hampshire provided him the second of an opening of pair of wins in the Republican nomination fight that accelerated his push for the party to coalesce around him and deepened questions about the path forward for Nikki Haley, his lone remaining rival. Again, no Republican candidate has ever won the first two states and then ultimately not secured the presidential nomination, a fact that Donald Trump himself noted in his victory speech that night. Trump also made history in yet another way, and that is he managed to amass the largest single total vote of any candidate for president ever running in the New Hampshire Republican primary. That would be Republican or Democrat, by the way. This beta test that I speak of was reflected in the fact that although Joe Biden's name was not on the ballot in the Democratic primary, there was a massive write-in effort staged for him so as not to embarrass an incumbent president. You see, the Democratic National Committee changed their nomination rules to essentially strip the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary of their delegates so as to originally not set up a early contest where Joe Biden would have had to face Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who at that point had announced his intention to run as a Democrat. The very low turnout in the Democratic primary in New Hampshire really reflects the fact that left-leaning independents were pushed into the Republican primary in order to try to embarrass Donald Trump. It didn't work. A win is a win is a win. Then in the following days, I think Donald Trump made a great decision. There was a motion within the Republican National Committee to pass a resolution that would declare him the presumptive nominee. I saw this and I regarded that news with some alarm, but then Donald Trump hours later put out a statement in which he said, "While I greatly appreciate the Republican National Committee," that's the RNC, "wanting to make me their presumptive nominee, and while they have far more votes necessary to do it, I feel, for the sake of party unity, they should not go forward with this plan, but that I should do it the old-fashioned way and finish the process at the ballot box. Thank you to the RNC for your respect and the devotion you have shown me." This was a wise move because had Trump acceded to this RNC plan to be arbitrarily declared the nominee before the votes in Nevada coming up next week, before the votes in South Carolina coming up the week after that, before the votes on Super Tuesday coming up in early March, well, his critics would have said that he was acting undemocratically. Ironic for people who have essentially cleared the field and made it impossible for anyone to challenge challenge Joe Biden in the Democratic contest. Bad news this week for former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. Bannon attempted to dismiss a fraud indictment by the state of New York, which will go to trial in New York City. The court in New York rejected his motion for dismissal. Specifically, Bannon is accused of defrauding donors in a We Build the Project online fundraising campaign that was supposed to raise money for Trump's signature domestic project. Bannon, I should note, has pleaded not guilty in this case, and you're not guilty in this country until you've had a fair trial and you're declared guilty. This trial is now scheduled for May. Specifically, the Manhattan District Attorney said that Bannon had defrauded donors of a nonprofit organization by falsely promising that none of the money they donated would be used for salaries, but then funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to his Confederates by laundering it, according to prosecutors, through third-party entities. We're going to be following that case. We also have a great lineup for you today. Not only do we have Darren Beattie, who is the editor-in-chief, actually senior editor of Revolver.news, with shocking analysis of January 6 footage regarding two pipe bombs that were placed outside the Republican National Committee and outside the Democratic National Committee. These videos, which he's going to walk us through, raise really extraordinary questions about what really happened on January 6th. We have still not had, despite the promises of Speaker Mike Johnson, a full disclosure of all the government footage of the events of that day. But what we have already seen is shocking and bolsters Mr. Beattie's contention that what we saw was not an insurrection, but as he calls it, a Fed-surrection. We have a great interview with him coming up. Also, a private citizen named Kevin Kline, who has a very interesting story. He's just an average, hardworking American. But when he learned that his great uncle's remains, because he had served on the U.S.S. Arizona, which was attacked and sunk at Pearl Harbor, and the remains of his comrades had never been recovered or identified, he took on a personal mission to identify, using DNA, the remains of those brave servicemen who died on December 7th, who were on the U.S.S. Arizona. This is an extraordinary story of one man making a difference. When the government refused to step up, this citizen did step up. It's a really, really terrific and inspiring story of true citizen action. Also coming up on the show, Paul Ingrassia, a lawyer from New Jersey, joins us with, I think, a very compelling and legitimate legal argument about whether Nikki Haley is actually constitutionally eligible to be president of the United States. It's a controversial argument, but I've read his substantial paper on this. I think he makes an extraordinarily good case for his argument, and he will join us. And then once again, before I let him go, you're going to get my mother's meatball recipe. I promise you that. Other stunning political revelations this week. A new book is out that tells us that Joe Biden did not want Kamala Harris as his running mate, that Joe Biden, in fact, hates Kamala Harris because back in the debates in 2020, Kamala Harris called Joe Biden out as a racist. I had to go back and look at that footage. I'd forgotten about that. The truth is, it was Joe Biden who was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972, riding the crest of opposition to the desegregation of the Wilmington, Delaware school system, famously saying that the desegregation of the Wilmington schools would make them a racial jungle, and I don't want my daughter going to school in a jungle. That is a direct quote from the Wilmington Journal. It's also Joe Biden, of course, who was the author of the 1994 crime bill, which is the legislation signed into law by President Bill Clinton, who at that point, running for re-election and seeking to look tough on crime, shifted the war on drugs, which had started under President Richard Nixon and was focused on drug kingpins, drug dealers, and drug cartels, to include the now harsh mandatory penalties for the first time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs. This has been criticized by many as racist because these laws and these mandatory penalties, in which judges have no discretion and no right to consider the circumstances of those charged, have been responsible for the mass incarceration for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of poor people, and specifically African Americans. So now we're told that Joe Biden wants to dump Kamala Harris and replace her with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. As I reported on this show last weekend, my sources in the Democratic Party, and yes, I do have a few, told me that when Joe Biden had lunch with former President Obama, Obama expressed his growing concern that Joe Biden was not up to the task of running for re-election. We read subsequently that certain key Obama staffers have now moved over to the Biden campaign. Now, I have been on the record for over 2 years. I believe I am the first person in the country tuned into politics to say that I believed that in the end, Joe Biden would not be the Democratic nominee for president, and that the Democratic nominee would be former First Lady Michelle Obama. I noticed just this past week, Bill O'Reilly has jumped on this train, so has Dick Morris. It is amazing how many folks are now echoing what I said 2 months ago. But then people say, well, how would this work? I mean, the filing deadlines for the primaries and the caucuses, some of them have already passed. Some of them will be up soon. The way I think the scenario works is that Biden is allowed to, having had all the opposition essentially being defanged, he's allowed to roll through the primaries and caucuses to get the necessary number of delegates to be nominated at their Chicago convention. How coincidental that the convention's in Chicago, by the way, hometown of, Michelle Obama. But then shortly before the convention, I predict that Joe Biden will announce that for reasons of health, as much as he would like to accept the nomination and seek another term, he is going to be stepping aside. At that point, he can legally, under party rules, release his delegates, and the convention would be free to nominate whoever they wanted to nominate. I believe that there, at that point, will be a major effort to draft Michelle Obama as, frankly, the strongest candidate the Democrats could field. She and her husband can raise unlimited money. She has no political track record to attack. She can actually divorce herself from some of the current and less popular policies of the Biden administration, despite the fact that, in fact, this is actually the third term of Barack Obama. And if you examine her personal journey, just as Barack Obama was the head of a voter registration drive before moving to politics, Michelle Obama now heads a voter registration drive. Barack Obama published 2 biographies laying out the narrative of his life, or at least his version of it. Michelle Obama has now laid out in 2 biographies the story of her life, or at least her version of it. And it is not incidental that Barack Obama gave the keynote at the convention that nominated John Kerry for president. 4 years later, Barack Obama came out of nowhere to defeat the vaunted Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton machine to snatch the nomination. Who was the keynote speaker at the last Democratic National Convention when they nominated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Well, that would be Michelle Obama. Folks who snicker at this idea or make jokes about it or about her do so at their own great political peril. I'm convinced that she would be a very, very difficult candidate to beat. We will see how this plays out, and we'll keep you posted on it. The trials of Donald Trump continue in New York City. It's a little confusing because in the initial E. Jean Carroll defamation lawsuit, there was an absolute finding that Donald Trump did not rape E. Jean Carroll, a woman who claimed that Trump had pushed her into a dressing room at the posh Bergdorf Goodman department store and raped her there. But the court in that decision did find that Trump had defamed her. Then E. Jean Carroll, who had a pretty disastrous interview on CNN where she actually opined for Anderson Cooper that she found the concept of rape sexy, and that she had a cat with a graphic last name. You could see Anderson Cooper turn red and move to a break rather quickly. She is now, as I think most people know, filed a second defamation suit, and the judge this past week, when Donald Trump sought to testify in his own defense, was essentially not allowed to do so because he had declined to testify in his own defense in the prior trial. The judge, a Judge Kaplan, announced to a shocked courtroom that Donald Trump had digitally invaded the genitalia of E. Jean Carroll. This was clearly meant for the political shock value. I don't know what these partisan Manhattan judges think they're doing, but I can tell you out in the country, people do not think that these are fair proceedings. And despite the findings in the New York judicial system, well, they also don't think it's fair. I also note, and I've mentioned this previously, that now, finally, after 187 years, the city of New York has removed the statue of founding father Thomas Jefferson that was outside City Hall. That is really quite extraordinary, and it signals what is about to come. I believe that there will be a move to take down the statue of Christopher Columbus in New York City. That statue has been removed in other cities. This is why I belong to the Italian American Civil Rights League. You can find it at iacrl.org. It is a non-profit organization. Everybody involved is a volunteer. There is no paid staff. There are no paid consultants. There is no fancy office space. Every single penny is spent to protect American history and heritage within the culture of the United States. And I can tell you right now that if there is a move by New York City to remove the Columbus statue, there will be a litigation to oppose that. So I urge you, if you are so inclined, to go to the website of the Italian American Civil Rights Organization, that's iacrl.org, and sign up there. Again, every penny goes to the program. If you go to the website, you will see a statement of purpose, a mission statement. Whether you're Italian American or not, we would love to have your support. The other political development that I found interesting is the fact that the No Labels effort, this is an effort to put yet another presidential candidate on the ballot, a third party candidate, announced that they had actually achieved ballot status in 26 states. Now, as I have told you before here on the Stone Zone, getting on the ballot for an independent for any office, whether it's President of the United States or whether it's the City Council, is extraordinarily difficult. That's because the laws that govern ballot access are written by Republicans and Democrats working together to eliminate the competition. They do it in two ways. First of all, they make it difficult to have an intra-party contest, so incumbents never get challenged by party outsiders, but also they make it particularly difficult to get on the ballot as an independent or a third-party candidate. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, there are states like Utah where you simply sign a form and you pay a fee and you're on the ballot. Not so in New York State. or say Ohio or Illinois or a number of other large states, there you have to get an extraordinarily large name of certified voter signatures that must be identical to the way the person is registered. So in other words, if I'm in the voter registration books as Roger J. Stone Jr., and I signed the petition Roger Stone, well, that signature under challenge would be disallowed. It's an extraordinarily difficult process, and if the no labels people who claim to be trying to create a third way are actually on the ballot in 26 states, that would be an accomplishment. But then the question becomes, who is their candidate? It was revealed this week in a terrific piece in The Hill by Kevin Cirilli that the No Labels Party, which is now chaired by former Senator Joe Lieberman from Connecticut, has been in some conversations with Nikki Haley. There's right off the bat some problem there because, you see, many states have what is called a sore loser law. That means that if you appeared on the ballot in an intra-party primary contest but did not win the nomination, well, you would then be barred from appearing on the ballot as an independent. So if Nikki Haley continues past South Carolina, where things frankly are not looking good for her, according to the latest polling, she could probably not be able to stand as a candidate for no parties. By the way, once you're on the ballot and the date has passed by which you can remove your name, whether you're running or not, that primary has to be held. So Ron DeSantis, for example, had up until December 12th to remove his name from the March 15th Florida primary ballot, and now it is too late to do so. So Florida will have a Republican presidential primary, and they will be face-to-face with President Donald Trump. Who are the no labels people going to go to? Could it be Senator Joe Manchin? Something very telling their executive director said, and that was, well, the sore loser law might prevent Nikki Haley from running for president, but we don't think it applies to candidates for vice president. Thanks for tuning in to the Roger Stone Show today here at 77 WABC. It's where you can learn all the political scuttlebutt, and we'll be right back.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio. We are the crown jewel of AM radio. take a minute to download the 77 WABC radio app, the Red Apple app, so you don't miss a single second of the amazing entertainment and talk, commentary, and analysis that we bring you every single day at 77 WABC. My guest today is Darren Beattie. He is the senior editor at Revolver.news. If you're not familiar with Revolver.news, you need to be. This is some of the tightest, most documented investigative reporting available in the country today. Also, some excellent opinion pieces there. This is, I think, one of the most important alternative news sources in the country. And Revolver.news has really been on the forefront of investigating and exposing exactly what happened on January 6th. Darren Beattie joins us on the Roger Stone Show today.
Great to be with you, Roger. Thank you.
As you know, Darren, the January 6th committee, which was a committee comprised of Democrats who hate Donald Trump and two Republicans who hate Donald Trump, was an oddity in that the recommendations for the committee submitted by the then minority leader were rejected by the speaker, and she wanted essentially, a hanging jury. And the January 6th committee proceedings were a one-sided affair, which used selectively edited and in some cases AI-enhanced audios and videos, called certain witnesses, ignored the shocking potential testimony of other witnesses. This was all before the election, of course, so designed to move political opinion. But I think most people now realize that this was kabuki theater. This was not a legitimate investigation into what actually transpired at the Capitol on January 6th. Very contentious in the fight for the Republican leadership. Kevin McCarthy, who served very briefly as Speaker, vowed to release all of the government camera footage of what happened that day, did not do so. That became a contentious issue and a challenge to his leadership. House Republicans, under the leadership, in this case, of Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, removed McCarthy from the chair, replaced him with Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, who renewed the pledge for full disclosure. So that's a good place to start. Darren, has he kept that pledge? Can the American people see all of the camera footage from government cameras of what transpired that day?
There's a lot there. I want to start by briefly saying something about the January 6th committee, which you point out was a total sham. It was a complete joke. And its purpose, but it did have a purpose. Its purpose, one, was to obscure and cover up the questions that would actually get to the core of what really happened on January 6th, namely the questions that we've been asking and pursuing at Revolver.news for years now. They studiously covered up those questions. So that was one. And then secondarily, the whole purpose was to basically tee up the indictment against Trump, and moreover to amplify this deranged thesis that Trump is somehow culpable or somehow instigated an insurrection which never happened in the first place because it wasn't an insurrection. So not only did he not instigate whatever it wasn't an insurrection, but that sham legal theory, which has provenance going all the way back to the lawfare corridors of Norm Eisen and a colleague of his called Joe Sellers, that sham legal theory, as we all can see now, is the pretext for removing Trump from ballots in some cases. Essentially, it's a key 2024 pillar because Trump looks to be the front runner, not only for the primary, which is already locked down, but even for the general election, it's clearer that to the Democrats that the only means that they have are extracurricular, extra democratic, as it were, to refuse Trump second stay in the White House, all in the name of democracy, of course. So those are really the stakes. And I think it's important to emphasize that because we're over 3 years away from January 6th. Some people might be saying, well, why are we still talking about it? Well, the Democrats haven't forgotten about it at all. Joe Biden gave a big speech on the third anniversary of January 6th, making it very clear that this is a major platform for the Democrats. And that's going to be important as we go forward and discuss our latest piece and the latest video that sort of catalyzed this piece. Now, I'd like to get into the video in some detail, but because you mentioned the speaker issue, my understanding is Speaker Johnson guaranteed the full 40,000 hours or such. He's released, I think, like 90 hours, and that was that first media wave of, footage of the Capitol Police firebombing, the crowd, and we saw some footage of January 6th protesters walking kind of peacefully through the Capitol, totally not the insurrection people were saying. And in some instances, we saw footage of Capitol Police opening doors. This is all very interesting and important and generated a news cycle. But really, this stuff, although it reinforces important things that we knew, we already knew them. We had already had video of very similar things. There's been video in circulation of the Capitol Police opening the doors for years now. So this is, for people who hadn't been paying attention, this is important to kind of reintroduce the truth about January 6th into the public consciousness and media cycle. But for those paying attention, it didn't really advance understanding. That's why I have to say that this specific, just 7-minute clip that's been the subject of one of the most viral political tweet threads in history that I did on this, and a bombshell report that we published in Revolver.news, I think this specific 7-minute clip is probably the most important January 6th footage in existence, because it advances our understanding and takes us very close to definitively cracking open the entire insurrection hoax. And the irony about this, and I'm a big champion of Congressman Gates. I think he did heroic work in all of this. But the irony of this is actually that this particular piece of footage was released by McCarthy under actually tremendous pressure from Congressman Thomas Massey. And I understand there are mixed reviews on this congressman, but I have to say, for the pipe bomb issue specifically and for January 6th issue specifically, Massey has been heroically persistent, and he really pushed hard and used his leverage to get this specific piece of video out. So I have to commend him for that. And with that, I'm happy to get into why this video is so important. But I'll pause in case you have any reaction.
Yeah, well, let's come to the video in a second, because it is shocking. And I've seen your rundown of it, and I think our listeners want to hear about it. For those who don't know, there were pipe bombs placed at both the Republican and Democratic National Committee headquarters, yet it has never been revealed to us by the government who and why these pipe bombs were placed there, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. It's interesting to me that there is a body within Congress, the euphemism it's called BLAG, B-L-A-G. It speaks for the House on all external legal matters. It is comprised of 5 members, 3 members of the majority, 2 members of the minority, and specifically in the case of the Colorado legal actions to bar Donald Trump from the ballot in that state, this majority of this committee filed an amicus brief with the state of Colorado, which basically certified the conclusions of the January 6th committee so that they could then be cited in the Secretary of State's decision and the state Supreme Court's decision. Now, it would be very, very simple for Speaker Johnson to reconvene the board of BLAG, where we now have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and to decertify the conclusions of the January 6th committee, and then it could not be used in any of these state proceedings where they're attempting to ban Donald Trump from the ballot based on this false claim that he was involved in insurrection. So I just want to raise that point because it raises questions to me about Speaker Johnson, who I very much want to like, but I still have some reservations about it. All right, Darren, tell us about this extraordinary video, which you really provided the first comprehensive analysis of.
Indeed. So as you mentioned, there were 2 pipe bombs associated with January 6th actually planted the evening before. There was one pipe bomb that was ultimately discovered in a back alley by the Capitol Hill Club, which has come to be called the RNC bomb. This one was planted around 8:30 p.m. the previous evening, the evening of the 5th. There was another bomb that was planted right outside a bench outside of the DNC complex, and that was planted, according to surveillance footage in the FBI, at approximately 8 p.m. on the 5th. So the video in question depicts the discovery of the DNC pipe bomb at 1:05 p.m. on the 6th. What we see first is, and people should go to revolver.news, the piece is right up on the top, and you can watch the video and kind of watch along or listen to me and then go there after and reinforce your understanding. But basically in the video, we see an individual come into view. He's wearing a backpack. He approaches a garage. There are 2 SUVs parked outside the garage of the DNC building. The backpack guy, who we now know to be a plainclothes Capitol Police officer, walks up to the Metro PD SUV, talks to the driver's side, then goes to the black SUV, talks to them. They are both part of Kamala Harris's Secret Service detail. That's important to know, and I'll get to why shortly. The Metro PD car is also part of the detail, even though it's Metro PD. So this guy goes up and he informed them of the pipe bomb within very close proximity, within feet. It's just in the benches that are just out of view of the camera angle at this point. Now, the first weird thing is, after being informed of the presence of a pipe bomb feet away, the Metro PD and Secret Service, the whole Secret Service detail, they take over a minute before even bothering to exit their vehicle, at which point they proceed to stand around in the most unconcerned and lackadaisical fashion imaginable. If people listening now go to the site, go to revolver.news and look at this video, just look at the video between, say, the 106 mark and the 108 mark and ask yourself, is this how you would imagine the Secret Service of the United States to behave upon being informed that there is an explosive device within feet of them and in very close proximity to their protectee, who is the VP-elect? It's stunning, but it gets even worse. In fact, the most egregious component of this video shows a group of children crossing the street in the direction of the pipe bomb, and then once crossed the street, walk within feet of the benches where the pipe bomb was placed. And the Secret Service are standing around there. They don't warn the children. They don't say, hey, there's a bomb here, don't come here. Nothing. They're standing around as though it's nothing, and they allow the children to walk right by as though it's nothing. So there's a clear lack of concern, not only for their own lives, not only for their own safety, not only for the safety of their protectee, Kamala Harris, but also this group of children that just walked by in the most cavalier way you could possibly think of. And so it's very clear, given all of these facts, they somehow knew that the bomb was not a danger. They knew it was a dud. They knew it wasn't a threat. They knew it was fake. But how would they know that? How would Kamala Harris's Secret Service detail know that the bomb posed no threat? And to make it even more interesting, so the last part of this video, there's a Capitol Police officer who walks right up to the bomb, snaps a photo, then gives a thumbs up signal to his colleagues, at which point they hustle for the first time in the entire 7 minutes. They're not hustling to get the bomb. They're not hustling to move people out of the way. The hustle begins once the Capitol Police officer snaps the photo, and then they all get the heck out of there. And then the video ends. Now, unfortunately, this is an explosive 7 minutes, but it's only 7 minutes, and I really wish a more expanded version were available to the public, because I've many people who have, well, not many, but a handful of people who have seen the more extended version directly. And what happens after the video ends is also kind of interesting, because what they do is they actually get a bomb-safe robot to dismantle and defuse this bomb. So the same bomb that was considered so benign for whatever reason that they're standing around it like nothing. They're not worried for Kamala Harris. They're not worried for the children who just walked by it. But then all of a sudden, once they snap their picture and leave the scene, the authorities who come in treat it like, oh my God, it's going to be Armageddon. We need a bomb-safe robot. That is also bizarre, to say the least. And I'll say something else that's bizarre and frankly kind of damning when you really think about it. It's so obvious and so obviously damning. We're talking about the Secret Service here. They were protecting Kamala Harris. This is at the DNC building on January 6th. Kamala Harris has studiously covered up the fact that she was present in the DNC building on the 6th. Studiously. In fact, she did that successfully for almost a year. It leaked almost a year after January 6th. She still hasn't publicly acknowledged it. Now think about how weird that is, Roger. You know very well, Kamala Harris is pretty much the most opportunistic political creature on this planet. Why would she forego the opportunity to milk politically the fact that she came within a hair's width of losing her life to this ostensible MAGA domestic terror pipe bomb? For that matter, why would Joe Biden, in his third anniversary of January 6th speech, and the whole purpose of it was to amplify the severity of January 6th and how evil and dark and domestic terror-like it was, why would Joe Biden neglect to mention that his own vice president almost lost her life to these MAGA pipe bombs? Keep in mind, they've been trying to amplify this as domestic terror event. These pipe bombs are the closest thing you're going to have to something resembling a terror event. The government officially considers pipe bombs to be weapons of mass destruction. And Joe Biden doesn't mention in his hour-long speech, more than an hour, for this guy, just standing up for a minute is a big deal. If he's going to dedicate a whole hour to something, it's because it's really important. And yet he doesn't mention that his own vice president was immediately endangered by the pipe bomb. I don't think this can be explained by senescence and cognitive decline alone, because Kamala Harris herself hasn't mentioned it, as I pointed out. So, we got to think this is intuitive. This is intuitive motivation here, but we have to ask ourselves, in light of this bizarre video with Kamala Harris's Secret Service clearly knowing somehow in advance the bomb was fake, how dark and how dirty and how embarrassing does the truth have to be for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to cover up the fact that Kamala was there when the pipe bomb was there? Because you would think this would be like the biggest January 6th talking point the Democrats would have.
All right,
and
unfortunately,
with that kind of luck, this pipe bomber should have bought a lottery ticket instead of planting the pipe bomb.
All right, a great rundown. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank my guest, Darren Beattie, senior editor at Revolver.news. I want to urge you to go to Revolver.news and subscribe. You can actually see the videos that Darren has given us an extraordinary rundown on today. And I can assure you that neither Revolver.news nor Darren Beattie will rest until the American people know everything they need to know about the events of January 6th. Thank you for being with us, Darren.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio, the crown jewel of AM radio. Please take a moment to jump over to the App Store and get the 77 WABC radio app. That way, if you miss one of our programs, you can go back and listen to it later, or you, of course, can listen live there as well. For my friends who are not in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area where I grew up, you can always listen to us at WABCradio.com. We are live streaming worldwide. There's very few places on the globe you can't hear us here at WABC Radio. Joining me now is Kevin Kline. Kevin Kline is not a professional genealogist. He is not a professional researcher. He is not a historian. He is a small business owner. He is a husband and father of 2 little girls. But he became aware of an area where he didn't think the government was doing the right thing. And therefore, he has taken it on himself to correct an egregious wrong. As I understand it, while on a family vacation to Hawaii, he sought to visit the memorial to the U.S.S. Arizona. The U.S.S. Arizona was one of those American ships, and pay his respects to his late great-uncle, gunner's mate second class, Robert Edwin Kline, who was killed along with many others on the U.S.S. Arizona during the attack on Pearl Harbor, but whose remains were never recovered. Now, this is different than the way the Pentagon and those in government handled those who were killed on the U.S.S. Oklahoma, and 93% of those brave Americans who gave their life in the service of their country are buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, where those killed on the U.S. Arizona are also interred, but evidently not identified. So Kevin Kline decided to start something he calls Operation 85. He's doing it with his own money and his own elbow grease and his own initiative. And he has a great story of success to tell. Kevin, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Wow, thanks, Roger. I appreciate the introduction. You hit all the basic information there, right on the nose there. And thanks for having me on and giving me an opportunity to kind of tell my story to your audience and use your platform. I greatly appreciate being here.
Well, the reason your story is so compelling and why I was so interested in getting you on the show is because it does show that one person can make a difference. Even if you have to take on an entire government bureaucracy, one person with the commitment to do the right thing can make an extraordinary difference. So tell us about your project, what you set out to do, what the obstacles have been. I'm going to sit back here and let you tell your own story because it's extraordinarily compelling, and I hope that it inspires other Americans to do their civic duty.
Yep. So Roger, you were right. My uncle was killed in the Arizona. I'm sorry, my great uncle killed in the Arizona. I knew his brother, which was my grandfather, so I kind of have this connection with that. But our family, and what I found out through this project, almost every other family, we always were under the assumption that the U.S.S. Arizona, the sunken ship that's there in Pearl Harbor, is the final resting place of all the missing crew. There were 1,177 killed from the U.S.S. Arizona, and that is both U.S. Navy and U.S. Marines, because there was an attachment of Marines on the Arizona as well. I believe 53 of the Marines are unknown and still missing, and currently 1,072 of U.S. Navy Americans are also still considered missing. We always assumed that the Arizona ship, whether they be entombed in it or surrounding it, the beautiful memorial above it, that was the final resting place of all of the Arizona crew. And to be honest, that's what our family always thought. And we were really, really okay with that. We understand the history that happened that day, the massive explosion. Probably, some bodies are never going to be recovered. They think that some bodies were possibly just disintegrated from the explosion, from the fires. So if you really look at the history from that day, it's very logical to understand, it's not everyone is going to be recovered. It was a tragedy what happened. But we always felt that was their final resting place. And I think our family and many other families that we've spoken to over the last year, we were all at peace with that. Whether mothers and fathers, they didn't get to bring home their sons, they didn't get to bury them, they didn't get to have a body or that last final, hurrah for their family member. They didn't get that. But everyone was at peace, at least knowing that's where they were. And so was my family. And on a bucket list, because I've, obviously known stories about my uncle, I have items that he sent home from the U.S.S. Arizona. He was 4 years on the Arizona. So he sent home items from the family that ended up with me. So I've had this little close connection to him. And yes, on a bucket list was for me to take me and my family to Hawaii and visit the U.S.S. Arizona Memorial, pay our respects, which we did, and the National Park Service was wonderful. They allowed us to do a flag-raising ceremony there on the mast of the ship with his name on it. They presented that to us. It was a wonderful ceremony. Everything was going fine. During the trip, I had purchased a book, Roger, on what had happened that day, and I was reading it on the flight home. I live in Northern Virginia from Hawaii. It's a long flight. And in that book is when I discovered that there were bodies removed from the U.S.S. Arizona, partial remains removed from the U.S.S. Arizona, never identified. Obviously, our country was about to go into a war. The area of Pearl Harbor was completely hectic and chaotic. So they removed these bodies. They were unable to identify them, and they buried them. I believe there was 170 that they were unable to identify, and they just temporarily buried them. About 2 years after the war, I think it was 1947, the U.S. Army began to disinter those 170 from the USS Arizona, and to do their very best at trying to identify them. And they were able to identify 105 of those 170 and basically bring them home. Most of them were either brought home to family graves here stateside, or the ones that were not were buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Oahu, which is about 10 miles away from Pearl Harbor. But they were also buried with full honors and with their name on their grave. However, In 1947, they didn't have any type of DNA technology, or they maybe even didn't understand that many years later they'd be able to use technology to identify these guys. So like many of the killed during World War II, they just buried them as unknown. The U.S.S. Arizona were buried in multiple commingled graves, so they're not single graves. Some have 25 in them, some have 8, some have 2, some have 1. To be honest, they really don't know. I think they did their best at the time to put bodies together in a very respectful way, but they were unable to bury them. And our family never knew that there were unknowns separated as most. It was in, I believe, 2015 that they began a Pearl Harbor project, and they began to connect with family members from the U.S.S. Oklahoma. Now, the Oklahoma, when that ship overturned, it was not as catastrophic with a fire as the Arizona was. So most of the crew members that died on the U.S.S. Oklahoma were actually entombed within the ship. And they made a decision at that time to upright the ship. And over some time, they were able to get into the ship and remove all those bodies. But all those at that point were also unidentifiable. So they, along with the Arizona, buried them in the same Pacific cemetery and marked them as unknown as well. I believe the number was 394 unknowns from the U.S.S. Oklahoma. And again, in 2015, the DPAA, along with the U.S. Navy Casualty Office and the U.S. Marine Casualty Office, and many other agencies that are involved in helping identify Americans, they began a project, the Oklahoma Identification Project, where they went out and they sought all the surviving family members of those crew members, solicited them for their DNA family reference sample. And at the end of this project, and at least where we are today, like I said, there were 394 unknowns. They were able to positively identify and give these guys their names back, 362 of the 394. And I want to put a little caveat on that. One of those 362 that were identified was actually a crew member from the U.S.S. Arizona. And, the chaos of that day, it was a Sunday morning. There were, I believe, different types of religious ceremonies on different ships. So crew members from one ship were allowed to go to other ships. The attack happened, at 8 a.m.-ish on a Sunday morning. It was a surprise attack. Americans and Navy guys and Marines could have been anywhere. And so during the process of identifying the Oklahoma, they were able to identify one U.S.S. Arizona guy they suspected was on the Oklahoma, and they suspected correctly. So that shows me that when they separate these commingled graves and call them, these are Oklahoma unknowns, these are Arizona unknowns, when you get down to it, that may not necessarily be the truth. There could be Oklahoma guys mixed in with these unknown Arizona guys and vice versa. We already know that happened. So I was very excited to hear about this project. And when we came home from Hawaii, I actually received a letter from the DPAA, and I had given my DNA probably back in 2015 or 14 when I heard about the Oklahoma project, thinking that maybe one day they'll do the Arizona, and I wanted to be the first one to participate. So the Navy did accept my DNA back in 2015 or whenever that was, and because of that, I was in the system, and I would get these letters from the DPAA inviting me once a year to go to their annual family update meeting. And to be honest, at the time, I saw no reason to go to it because my family member, according to what I believed, my family member was either in the Arizona or under that memorial. There would be no reason for me to go to these meetings. But now finding out that these unknowns were, in fact, removed, my interest was piqued. I had to. So this meeting was in Norfolk, Virginia. I live in Northern Virginia, so it was about a 2-hour drive. So I went to this one. And it was a very interesting meeting. And you, at that time, get an opportunity to do a one-on-one with what they call your Navy assigned casualty officer. Since my family member was in the Navy, I had someone from the Navy, and you're able to go on a one-on-one. And at that point, I had a lot more questions about, and not just information about my uncle, because I had quite a bit. I wanted information about when the Arizona project was going to start, just like the Oklahoma. And so I was, I guess, tactful enough to invite some of the higher up people that were attending that meeting. I had the director of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System. I had some historians. Anybody I could drag into my personal one-on-one meeting, I did. And I laid it on the line. I was very honest. I was appreciative of the information they gave me, but I was very honest and said, hey, I love the success of the Oklahoma. When is the Arizona guys going to be done next? Because we didn't know about these unknowns. And, I think our nation's mission is to never leave anyone behind. Clearly, that's the mission of this government agency assigned to do that. And Roger, I was really kind of let down and disturbed at the answer I got. And I don't think it was meant in any nefarious way, but basically the answer I got from one of the officials was, Kevin, the bang is not big enough for the buck. And
so they basically
what they meant
told
by
you,
that was,
they told you, as I understand it, that to try to identify the remains of those on the U.S.S. Arizona would cost $2.9 million, 12,600 man hours, and could take as much as 10 years. And to the bureaucracy, it wasn't worth the cost.
Exactly. The bang wasn't big enough for the buck. They would have to go out and find thousands of family members, ask them for their DNA. Those numbers that you're referring to are correct, Roger. That was from a 2022 feasibility study done by the Navy that basically said it's too cumbersome, it's too expensive, it'll take up too much time. We're never going to be able to find all these family members. Most likely, we're never going to be able to do it. What they did decide to do, or a proposal, was, this was in 2021 we found about this, the DPAA director, along with the Navy, were discussing a proposal to just disinter all the 85 unknowns from the U.S.S. Arizona, do not identify them, put them in a box, put them into, or, obviously honorably, but put them back into the hull of the U.S.S. Arizona with the rest of the crew, wipe their hands and call it a day, and say the entire U.S.S. Arizona crew was accounted for. Now, that creates many problems. One, we already know that there was an Arizona guy mixed in with the Oklahoma guys. So for them to just assume that those are all Arizona guys is not a good assumption. They most likely could be wrong. Also, another assumption, Roger, is when they began the Oklahoma project, they were going to disinter one grave, which they believed only had 5 remains. However, when they disinterred that one grave, believing there were 5, it turns out there were 93 sets of remains in that one grave, opening up a can of worms. So when I say they believe there's 85 U.S.S. Arizona crew members in those graves, when this project begins, there very well could be many more that are identified, not only from the Arizona, but you might find commingled graves of other ships and other missing Americans from that day, commingled with those as well. So it's a conundrum, but the bottom line is the government refused to do it. They basically said it was never going to happen. They were never going to identify those. And I drove home from Norfolk to Northern Virginia pretty upset. That drive where you turn the radio off and you talk to yourself the whole way. And it just, the anger just boiled up for the entire drive. And it was that drive that I decided, if the United States government is not going to do this, then I will. And Roger, like you said, I'm not a researcher. I'm not a genealogist. I didn't know what to do, how to start. I just knew I'm a business guy. I can run this like a business, and we're going to figure this out along the way. And that's what we did. And I got to tell you, first, I decided to do this as professionally and as I possibly could. I did not want to raise money at the very beginning because I felt that would cloud the mission of just getting this done. I didn't expect, Roger, I would be here a year later still kind of fighting and arguing with government agencies to do this. But I knew that it could be done. So we set out on this mission, and what I did first was I actually connected with every government agency that I felt would have some authority over this, touch this in some way, because I didn't want to be a rogue, angry family member. I didn't want to come at that angle. I wanted to come very professional, organized, and say, we're going to do this, we're going to help you. And to their credit, the U.S. Navy, the Casualty Office, the U.S. Marines, very gung-ho, very excited. They gave me tips on kind of the roadmap to how to do this. The one government agency whose job it is to do this was the one government agency I thought would be the most excited about my announcement. However, that, in my opinion, is the upper levels of this agency, what's called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, or known as the DPAA. I've said that a few times. That has the most bureaucracy, and that was the toughest wall to crack. And I'm still trying to crack that wall with them. It's been very difficult. I'm kind of learning things as I go, learning how to maneuver through this. I realize that it's going to take politics. It's going to take legislative action to move this forward. It's going to take awareness to raise resources and money. But bottom line with all of that, I still have gung-ho. We started this April 6, 2023. Since April 6, 2023, we started out, I believe there was 19 crew members represented that had started before us. Today, we've connected with over 760 U.S.S. Arizona surviving family members. That is enough to represent 380 of the crew members that are missing. And the exciting part of that is we're getting close to a threshold policy that the Department of Defense had set, meaning they would not consider a disinterment and identification project of the Arizona unless they had 60% minimum crew members represented with DNA. So 60% is 643 crew members need to be represented before they would even begin to officially work on this. That's their policy. So my question was, well, what are you guys doing to get to that 60%? How are you reaching out? And the answer was nothing. They have no intention of reaching out. They have no intention of reaching that policy. It was never going to happen. So hence the Operation 85 started. Family members began getting involved. I've pretty much put my entire life, as you said, on hold. My wife and I are business owners here in Northern Virginia, and she's kind of running the business by herself. And I did not expect this to last an entire year, but we're closing in on an entire year. But the success we're getting is undeniable, and the DPAA and the Department of Defense can no longer shrug their shoulders at what we're doing because they are getting family members. Like you said, we have now 380 crew members represented. Our goal is to not stop at the threshold, which is 643. We want every crew member represented. But it takes patriots like you, Roger, that allow me to come on your platform, tell the story. You never know where a U.S.S. Arizona family member may be. We're not driving around with bumper stickers on our cars, but most of us know that story in our background. We've heard it from our grandparents. We've heard it from our parents. We know there's a crew member. And so while we have volunteer researchers actively working and doing genealogy trees, and we're trying to reach out to them proactively, platforms such as yourself and your shows allow us to reach out to a broader, wider audience, cast a bigger net, and hopefully some of your audience are listening to this, have a crew member and their family, and they can reach out to us and kind of help us out that as best as possible. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
It's an amazing story of one person deciding they can make a difference. Let's get some information here. I know you've sunk at least $50,000 of your own money as well as your time and your resources, and of course time away from your family. You're doing something the government should be paying for, but they declined to do so. I am happy to hear that they are, at least for the most part, cooperating with you. If people want to, if people have a U.S.S. Arizona member in their family and they want to contact you, how can they do that?
Yes, please reach out. Our website is USSArizona.Navy. It's www.USSArizona.Navy, Navy. That's the best way. So we have a online portal where a family member can just click on that and enter in some generic information. It's not too personal. And I want to say, Roger, our website and our mission, we're really just the middleman with a third party. We do not collect DNA. Our Operation 85, we're just civilians, volunteers. We're not asking you to send in the DNA of those family members. All we're doing is connecting family members to our project. We do verify we have one board-certified genealogist that has volunteered her time to verify the connection. Once the connection is verified, then we send that information either to the U.S. Navy, if it was a Navy crew member, or the U.S. Marine Corps, if it was a Marine casualty. And then the Navy and the Marines pick up. They will actually then call the family member directly, confirm the information. It's the Navy that sends out the DNA kit. It's very quick to do. It's just a cotton swab in your cheek. Everything is there for you. You put the cotton swab back in the collection tube. It's all prepackaged. It's got postage on it. And then it gets mailed to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System in Dover, Delaware. They collect the DNA. Many people are always hesitant, scared. What are they going to do with my DNA? These projects are compartmentalized, which means there's no sharing of information outside of the U.S.S. Arizona DNA project. We even have to be careful, and we have been, when we give contact information to the Navy, even though we've given them the name, address, phone number, the relationship, the Navy is not allowed to share any personable information back with us because they want to make sure that information is secure. So we found ways to kind of work along that. We really identify people with their either Y-DNA or mtDNA. So it's a very complicated process, but we tried to make it as efficient and as easy. And again, this was supposed to take 10 years and $3 million, and we're at 8 months and about $50,000 of my own money. And those are physical costs, Roger. I can't account. We have 3 full-time volunteers. And when I say full-time, they have also put their lives on the side. So there's 4 of us that have just committed to this project. I'm one family member. The other 2 have great experience. They've worked on the 9/11 project with genealogy and identifying Americans from the September 11th attacks. These are people that have really, really good backgrounds and education in this. And by getting these high-level people on our team, it also made the DPAA kind of take us a little more seriously because we were giving them the information they needed, but for some strange reason, they just didn't want to do it on their own. And that's what's sad. And Roger, the other thing with this project, we've not only connected with so many U.S.S. Arizona family members, we have connected with dozens and dozens of family members that have been fighting the DPAA with their family member in other theaters of war. Family members calling me from their husband or their dad is missing from Vietnam. And they're saying, how did you do this? How did you break the wall? We've been fighting with the DPAA for years. We can't get answers. And, there may be an opportunity here when the Arizona project is done to kind of use the resources, the efficiency, the methods that we've built to do this so quickly, hopefully to help other family members that are missing from the Korean War or missing from Vietnam War, the Cold War, there's unknowns. There's a lot of families out there that never got answers. And there's not an easy way to connect directly with the DPAA. They're all funneled through their casualty offices, and those are the worker bees. Those are the hard people on the lower levels working their butts off, and they also have to answer the phones. It was probably, Roger, 5 to 6 months of me sending angry emails, tweets, getting politicians involved, just to get my first meeting with the director of the DPAA. And we've had 2. The first meeting was nothing more than an appeasement meeting where they basically said it couldn't be done. It was very early on. The second meeting was a complete turnaround. They realized that we were making a lot of noise with this. We were starting to get a lot of people involved. The numbers were increasing. they realized they just couldn't ignore us at that point. But it has been very difficult to break through that bureaucracy wall with some of these government agencies. And to all credit to the DPAA, I also understand now there's someone above them, and that's the Department of the Defense, that is telling them what to do. So even though I kind of put a lot of pressure on the DPA director and kind of point him as my adversary to get this done, the truth is, I think if him and I talked privately, which we haven't ever done, but should we, I think he might say, Kevin, keep going. You're doing great. A lot of employees, it's fun, Roger, when I get emails from government employees and I get them from their Gmails or Yahoo, I know right away I'm going to get good information because they're emailing me information and intel from their private emails because they just want to keep me going. We're on the right path. We're doing the right thing. We just need to break through the bureaucracy. And I think we're right on the edge. And again, I appreciate, people like you just letting me tell my story and pushing it even a little bit further to where we can get this done. No American deserves to have unknown on their grave.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Let me thank my guest, Kevin Kline, who is doing his civic duty to help our veterans and their families. God bless you, my friend, and thanks for joining us on the Roger
Thanks,
Stone
Roger.
Show.
Appreciate it.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Presented by Legacy Precious Metals.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC. And joining us now is New Jersey lawyer and activist Paul Ingrassia. I saw an extraordinarily well-reasoned piece that he wrote for Substack in which he made a compelling case that under the precepts of the U.S. Constitution, that former UN ambassador and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley may not actually be constitutionally eligible to be President of the United States. Now, this is a question that has come up in the past in American politics. It was raised when John McCain was elected because he was born in the Panama Canal Zone. There was some question as to whether that applied to the Constitution's requirement that one be a naturally born citizen. Also came up earlier than that when Connecticut Senator Lowell Weicker, who was born in Paris, France, decided to run for president. Didn't really matter because literally nobody voted for that guy, and he was never going to be president. Obviously, there is the Obama birther controversy, which we're not here to talk about today. But I'm going to let Paul Ingrassia lay out for us his legal analysis of why he believes that Nikki Haley, who is now appears to be, at least for the time being, hanging in the race for president against President Donald Trump, is constitutionally eligible to be president. Paul, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. It's always an honor to speak with you. Yeah, it's an interesting argument. I mean, as of now, there are a slew of reasons why Nikki Haley should not be running for president. Of course, the eligibility clause requirement that's stipulated in Article 2, Section 1 is just, a small component of all that, of the entire equation. I mean, she's being funded by the same people who are financing these lawsuits against Donald Trump, so on and so forth. But for the purposes of this constitutional question, I think it's really an interesting and compelling case. Recently our friend Laura Loomer came up with this investigative report demonstrating that neither one of Nikki Haley's parents were citizens at the time she was born in South Carolina in 1972. So The Constitution lays out pretty clearly and what the requirements are in order to qualify for the presidency. You have to be here for 14 years, residing within the United States for 14 years. You have to be at least 35 years of age. And the third requirement is that you have to be a natural-born citizen. Now, the language natural-born citizen only appears in Article 2, Section 1. This, notably, is the only clause in the entire Constitution that lays out the specifications for the presidential office holder. Now, the requirements to be a member of Congress, for example, are laid out in Article 1. It says that you have to be a citizen to be a member of the House or the Senate, but it doesn't say natural-born citizen. So that language is notably omitted for congressional members as well as judicial office holders as laid out in Article 3. So right off the bat, just, as a threshold matter, if you're just kind of applying the plain language of the text of the Constitution itself, it would appear that that the framers of the Constitution, and this we know is certainly true, wanted a higher standard for the presidential office holder, which of course is the highest office of the land, than other federal office holders. So that's sort of like, the original sort of threshold issue. Now, if you go further into the analysis, the term natural-born citizen only appears in Article 2. So in order to get an originalist understanding, like what this term actually meant for the people who adopted our Constitution, for the Founding Fathers, resort has to be made to a text by the famous legal theorist, this legal scholar, who promoted a highly influential legal treatise at the time the Founding Fathers adopted the Constitution. This legal treatise was called The Law of Nations. It came out in 1758, about 30 years prior to the adoption of our Constitution. And that's where the language natural-born citizen comes from. And that's where James Madison adopted that language when he ultimately implemented it into our own Constitution. So the term natural-born citizen, while it may be ambiguous as to what its meaning, what it means based on just a textual analysis of our own Constitution, it's very clear what it meant according to that legal treatise by Emmerich de Vital in The Law of Nations. And that said that his work said, and I'll quote, natural-born citizens are born in the country of parents who are citizens. So Article 2, Section 1 uses the language natural-born citizen. It says that anyone could become president as long as they are natural-born citizens or citizens at the time the Constitution was adopted. So for those saying, well, George Washington or John Adams, their parents were not citizens because obviously it predated the Constitution. Obviously they made a clause for that to qualify the original adopters of the Constitution itself. So, if you're applying the original meaning of the term natural-born citizen, and Nikki Haley presents herself as a conservative, someone who would appoint originalist judges to the Supreme Court and to other federal courts, who are tasked with faithfully applying the law, the Constitution, based on its original meaning. On those grounds alone, it would seem that that natural-born citizen would render her ineligible to run for president because both of her parents were not citizens at the time the Constitution was adopted. Now, there's more to this analysis, and we can go further into this, Roger, but a few other questions that I have regarding Nikki Haley is there is really very little online. I mean, I don't know if you've done a deep dive into this. Maybe our friend Laura has, but, what ultimately was the citizenship status of her parents when she was born on U.S. soil? I really can't find anything online about that. I think she as a national candidate, as the second, obviously she's far behind Donald Trump, but, running for the presidency, I think she owes her constituents and the American people at large sort of a comprehensive summary of the permanent resident status of her parents, a legal explanation of what their status was. Were they here on student visas? Were they here on some sort of business visa or something else? I mean, we don't know whether these people were even here lawfully or unlawfully. I mean, she claims they were lawfully domiciled in the United States, her parents, when she was born. But, without the evidence supporting that, we have no idea whether that's true or not. So I think she should, at the bare minimum, present that evidence and give us a comprehensive overview, and perhaps let independent people substantiate those claims that she's making rather than her own campaign. And because, as of right now, one could not be at fault for thinking that her parents were illegals and she was, an anchor baby. But, there's a lot there that I just laid out. Probably under Nikki Haley's own analysis, and those who defend Nikki Haley are basically making the claim that anyone who crosses the southern border and arrives here, whether they're legally or illegally here, if they have a child on U.S. soil, that child is automatically allowed to become president of the United States. I mean, that is totally incompatible with the original meaning of the eligibility clause in Article 2, Section 1. So anyone who suggests that is certainly going against what the Constitution plainly lays out and what the Founding Fathers also intended for the presidential office.
Paul, have the federal courts ever substantially opined on what exactly the Constitution means when it says natural-born citizen?
Well, Roger, there have been a few cases, and the most famous case, most of these cases occurred after the Civil War, the late 19th century, in the decades after the 14th Amendment was adopted. So those critics of my argument typically rely on the 14th Amendment and a case by the name of Wong Kim Ark, which was a Supreme Court case that found that a Chinese child, basically Chinese foreign nationals, were stationed in California. They were here lawfully in the late 1890s, and they had a child on U.S. soil. And this child apparently went back with the parents to China and then tried to re-enter the United States. Now, this was during the time in which the Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect. So that child was not able to get back into the United States because U.S. authorities at the time found the child to not be a U.S. citizen. This was their reasoning. This was the reasoning of the United States government because that child was born to non-citizen parents. So this was a case that did not deal with, a president of the United States. It just dealt with your average citizen. Now, the question I should just state up front of whether birthright citizenship and whether the merits of Wong Kim Ark or whether the case itself is a legally valid opinion is a matter up for debate. But I would say that's an entirely separate argument. The issue of birthright citizenship and whether we should be conferring birthright citizenship to the child of lawfully domiciled alien residents here is a separate matter than the question of presidential eligibility. We know, as I stated earlier, that the Founding Fathers and the framers of the Constitution wanted to set a much higher bar for the presidential office holder than members of Congress or just basic citizenship. The basic privileges and immunities of citizenship was a much lower standard than someone running for president. So Wong Kim Ark is utterly silent on the issue of qualifications or eligibility for the presidency. But that is the only case on the books that even sort of indirectly or tenuously deals with the question of, birthright citizenship and presidential eligibility. Now, in that case, Wong Kim Ark, the majority opinion, briefly glanced over the presidential eligibility question, but it did not give it a comprehensive analysis. It did not do a comprehensive analysis of Article 2, Section 1. It kind of just mentioned it, but it did not address one way or the other whether this opinion's holding would also impute to Article 2, Section 1. Then the rest of the opinion goes into, the rights of this individual, Wong Kim Ark, and whether he should be conferred the basic privileges and immunities of citizenship because his parents were here. Although not citizens, they were here lawfully at the time. So aside from that opinion, Roger, no other case is, as far as I'm aware, goes into the question of presidential eligibility. Now, it's interesting to note that the dissent in Wong Kim Ark was joined by Justice Harlan, who famously also dissented in Plessy versus Ferguson. So that kind of just goes to show, I think, the merits of Wong Kim Ark in and of itself. And I think, honestly, this is a case that should also be revisited by the Supreme Court. But again, that's an entirely separate matter. On the question of presidential eligibility, critics would say, well, the 14th Amendment confers natural-born citizenship on anyone born here to foreign parents, whether they're here lawfully or not. But the phrase natural-born citizen does not appear, for one, in the 14th Amendment. Number two, the 14th Amendment clearly applied to newly freed slaves in the aftermath of the Civil War and the citizenship status of those emancipated slaves. It had nothing, it was totally silent on the issue of presidential eligibility. If the framers of the 14th Amendment believed that it would be distorted and applied to the question of presidential eligibility, I'm confident that they would have written a separate clause in there specifying the higher threshold requirements for the presidential office holder.
All right, let's go to politics here for just a minute.
Sure.
The candidacy of Nikki Haley is intriguing to me. She's not competing in the Nevada primary,
Right.
neither the caucuses or the primary, or I believe she may be in the preferential primary, which is merely a beauty contest, but does not award any delegates, but she is not competing in the caucuses where actual delegates are awarded. And then in her home state of South Carolina, things are not looking good. I mean, Donald Trump is pulled out to an almost 30-point lead. The governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, strongly supporting Donald Trump. The lieutenant governor, strongly supporting Donald Trump. The leader of the Republicans in both houses of the legislature, both supporting Donald Trump. It is a state that, like New Hampshire, non-Republicans can vote in the primary. Actually, South Carolina has no party registration, meaning Republicans, Democrats, and independents can all vote in either the Republican or Democratic primary. But the difference in South Carolina is the independents don't lean left, they lean right. And of course, there is also a substantial number of, at least 20% of conservative Democrats. They tend to be older, but they are quite probably votes for Donald Trump. So the real question to me is, what is Nikki Haley's goal? She's not going to be nominated for president. She could be doing what George H.W. Bush did in 1980, which is because she still has special interest money in the bank, despite her lack of viability, she stays in the race to try to up her profile and make it more likely that she can essentially leverage her way onto the ticket for vice president. I've seen Clay Travis, a radio personality, articulate that over the last couple of days. I don't think that can work for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's the question of her personal integrity. She looked Donald Trump in the eye and she told him, "You're among our greatest presidents. If you run again, I will not run." And then she ran. But then secondarily, her defense and foreign policy views, I hate to say this, but they are identical to Joe Biden's. So what we really see here is a uniparty effort to have a foot in both major parties, and she is the fallback for the deep state in their out that they can either continue to damage Donald Trump by her staying in the race, or they try to leverage her on the ticket, in which case I have said were she to be vice president, Donald Trump would need a food taster.
Yes. No, I think that's exactly right, Roger. And I think, the results of New Hampshire made that quite clear, that she is the vessel or the vehicle for the Uni Party, for the establishment, for the Democrats. I mean, most of her voters, at least in the state of New Hampshire, and I'm sure this will be true elsewhere if she remains in the primary process, will be Democrats or never Trump or Republicans, basically all liberals. That's the only way that she's maintaining the little momentum that she has. And of course, she has a lot of funding from big money Democrat spenders, people like Reid Hoffman, who's also financing this ridiculous case now transpiring, with the E. Jean Carroll downtown Manhattan, where I am right now. So, she is definitely a vessel for the establishment, for the Uni Party, for the deep state. Her foreign policy views are neoconservative and are definitely in lockstep with Biden, with Bush, with McCain. So she's exactly that. And I think that you hit it right out of the park with that. Let's hope, and it seems like many Americans have woken up to that reality, and that she is a true snake, as Donald Trump likes to frequently talk about on the campaign trail, trying to slipper herself back into the administration. It's the real tragedy with this whole thing is that it's a colossal waste of time, energy, and resources that should otherwise be spent on Donald Trump. We know the RNC yesterday issued a statement that, they would potentially, make Trump the presumptive nominee regardless of the outcome of the primaries. And Trump, of course, quickly shot that down, saying he wants it to play out, given the lack of loyalty that the RNC has showed Trump all throughout this as well. But I think you're exactly right. And I think, hopefully Nikki Haley's campaign will soon come to an end, and we can forget about talking about bird brain, and she'll be relegated to the dustbin of history, much like our friend the Sanctimonious.
All right. Thank you, Paul Ingrassia, a New Jersey lawyer, supporter of President Donald Trump, for joining us today on the Stone Zone. Paul, because you are a member of the Italian-American Civil Rights League, you appreciate the fact that I promised my listeners from the beginning of the show that my mother's, therefore my grandmother's, meatball recipe would be revealed. So here it is. I hope you all had time to get pen and paper to write this down. First, you're going to want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees and put a Pyrex dish at the bottom filled with water. You're going to see why that comes in handy later. You want to saute some onions, some garlic in a high quality olive oil. There are special olive oils that are specifically for sauteing. You can get them at Gristiti's. In a big bowl, you want to add 3 pounds of meat. That is 1 pound of ground beef, 1 pound of ground veal, 1 pound of ground pork. add a cup and a half of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. You also then want to add 3 cups of Italian breadcrumbs, 6 eggs that you have whipped, and some fresh chopped parsley, but only a quarter cup. In the beginning, by the way, I should say, you want a fair amount of garlic and onions. I'm talking about, a couple of good-sized heads of garlic. Now, you add to that mixture 1 tablespoon of oregano, 1 tablespoon of basil, 1 tablespoon of thyme, 1 tablespoon of marjoram, 1 tablespoon of ground black pepper, the coarse kind, and then 2 tablespoons of kosher salt. To that mixture, I add 3/4 of a cup of water. Now, I form my meatballs, try to keep them kind of loose, but making sure that they hold together. I then brown them in the same pan where I sauteed the onions and the garlic at the beginning of this recipe, but keep turning them over because you don't want them to be flat on any side. After they are slightly browned, you will put them on a large baking sheet, and you will go back to the oven, which you already preheated, at 350. Remember that Pyrex dish in the bottom with the water. Very important in terms of keeping your meatballs moist. You will bake for 40 minutes, and you're done. You drop that into your basic marinara sauce. We've given that recipe a number of times. We'll do it again. And you will have the perfect meatball. So there it is. That is my grandmother Corbo's recipe for the perfect Italian meatball. We had a lot of requests for that since our very first show, and I'm proud to share it. Enjoy it on this cold Sunday. I'm Roger Stone. This has been my pleasure to be with you today on the Roger Stone Show. Please stay tuned for my good friend Joe Piscopo, who will be right along shortly with Sundays with Sinatra.